is Alice in Muggleland, with the man who would be Hufflepuff, Bilious McDaniels, and Alice, the mudblood who joined the Hogwarts Express.
Hey, Alice.
Hey, Bill. What's up?
I have another question from you from one of these other wizarding types, from Marcus Ashview. He is a amateur Quidditch player,
Oh, God.
and he wants to know, how does a muggle go through and play cards without the worry of them not exploding? Isn't that the point of playing cards?
Playing cards don't explode in the Muggle world.
But wouldn't that give more excitement to your card games?
I'm going to say that's probably a little too much excitement. Our card games are pretty exciting without that.
Do the cards fly?
No.
How are they exciting? You don't have anything flying, you don't have anything exploding. How are they exciting?
It's exciting because, Muggles are competitive as hell.
Hope you got your answer there, Marcus. Alright, so now we go through and we are on chapter 15, The Forbidden Forest. Now, in regards to these documents, this is the chapter of the documents of Harry Potter and the Philosopher's Stone that I actually dislike almost out of all the chapters in any of the books. I mean, there's tomes that I don't like overall because of the story, but this particular chapter I always have trouble reading, and it's because of the very beginning of it.
Okay. Do tell.
The fact that McGonagall had to go through and was so disappointed at her 3 Gryffindors. I just felt ashamed by the fact that she was so disappointed in the 3 kids being out in the middle of the night and losing the 150 points for Gryffindor. I was like, how could you do that to McGonagall?
Okay, but didn't she do that to them? I mean,
that's what I mean. It's like she did that to them, but it's like the McGonagall as a witch, it's something where I don't want I don't like to see her disappointed. And it was just like she had to go through and do this to show not only that she doesn't favor her house, but to get the point across of how important it is to follow the rules. And it's like, just reading through her disappointment of the whole entire matter, it always makes me twitch a bit. Of oh, I have so much trouble reading over that.
Very interesting. It isn't easy to read, that's for sure, because you have these you have the sort of victory where you think that they're going to win the House Cup, and then it's just snatched out of their hands by one, relatively minor infraction. I mean, yes, the whole smuggling a dragon out of Hogwarts was probably not very wise, but if they had just remembered the Cloak of Invisibility, this would not have happened. So it seems like really it was a very minor mistake that they made that led to this disastrous result for their house.
Yep, it is a minor mistake that had big consequences to the house. And, of course, Neville, Harry, and Hermione are also paying for that disdain from members of Gryffindor, other than Ron, because of the massive drop of points.
They didn't mention whether or not Malfoy got points taken away, but presumably because he's just one person, even if they took 50 points away from Slytherin, they'd still be in better shape than Gryffindor with 150 points going away. It would have been kind of nice if the book had included a scoreboard so that we could follow along.
I've always considered actually sitting there and building up a scoreboard of just exactly how many points are won and lost, just to go through, and because you'll find out that they talk about, in this chapter, they talk about gaining points to the House Cup toward Quidditch, but they never specifically go off and say, Is it the points that they score during the Quidditch match that goes towards the points, or is it another thing that another type of point schedules? They don't actually do a point conversion if that's the case.
Right.
Because in this, Wood specifically tells Harry, how are we supposed to gain points if we can't play Quidditch?
Well, I was just wondering if it would be possible to create the scoreboard, because there are minor instances that are mentioned in the books about, Hermione answering a question correctly and 5 points for Gryffindor. I think this would be a really big challenge because there's not enough information in the text to actually give you, a legit running tally for the different houses. But it would have been interesting to have that included in the book. I would have enjoyed having that to follow along, since they're making such a big deal of it now. Honestly, before now, I wasn't thinking of this as such a big deal, but now that they are taking away all these points for this infraction, it would have been nice to be able to see exactly how that affected the standings.
Yeah, because I think really, this really pushes that to the forefront of how much this means to the actual kids in the houses. With that, it had to take a drastic drop off for it to show any actual reaction going through.
Right. Anyway, obviously this is very important to them. So as you mentioned, they are basically being shunned. And not just by Gryffindors. They're being shunned by Hufflepuffs and Ravenclaws because they're sick of Slytherin always winning. So it's a very lonely place for Hermione and Ron and Harry right now. Neville also got caught up in this. So it's very, very lonely at Hogwarts at the moment. But it's about to get worse.
It is about to get worse.
So they mention in this chapter kind of so what's interesting to me about these books is that we get into these little vignettes that are very detailed. So like we got the whole story about the dragon. Though, to be honest, this is a relatively minor side story to the main plot, except in so much as that it cost Gryffindor so many points when they left the Cloak of Invisibility at the top of the tower. So, the larger plot about the Philosopher or the Sorcerer's Stone still being hidden in Hogwarts and protected has been marching on without us getting much more detail, but we get a glimpse of that story in this chapter because we see Professor Quirrell leaving a room in a state of great agitation. And Harry's interpretation of what he sees in that moment is that Quirrell has finally broken. So we believe that Quirrell has been standing up to Snape and not allowing him to get at the stone. But now we think that he's broken and that he's finally, done something to aid Snape in his pursuit of the stone. But we don't know what that is because we didn't witness the conversation that happened in the room. This is entirely, Harry's observation of Quirrell leaving a room looking like he's, greatly distraught.
Well, he heard Quirrell say something that also led to that thought.
Right. So, but he's not hearing the whole conversation. He doesn't even know for sure who the conversation was with. He just suspects that it was Snape. And so despite his best efforts to not involve himself in things that, have nothing to do with him, he is, still finding himself drawn to find out what's going on with Quirrell and Snape, Fluffy, and the stone.
Yeah, especially in this case because they decided when Harry decided not to meddle at all, and you have Ron, who didn't lose the house points, trying to egg them on. What are we going to do? What are we going to do? And they're like, no, we're not doing anything. We're just going to keep our heads down and just finish the year. So, because Ron isn't really, while Ron's friends with Harry and Hermione, I don't think he's getting the brunt of how Harry and Hermione actually feel about what's going on.
Well, he has a different perspective on it that I thought was interesting. He mentions that his brothers have lost tons and tons of points for Gryffindor over the years, and they're still very popular. So from Ron's life experience, albeit vicariously through his brothers, this is not actually that big of a deal. He'll concede that they've never lost 50 points each at a time, at one time. But as far as he's concerned, the whole losing of points for the house is kind of a shrug, no big deal. This is just the price of being a proactive Hogwarts student. So yeah, I kind of like Ron's sort of, I have a feeling if it had happened to him, he would feel a little more distraught. But maybe not that bad, because as far as he's concerned, this is just, what his family does at Hogwarts. They come in, they cause mischief, and they get points deducted from the house, but, gosh, they sure had a good time doing it. So
Gryffindors are gonna Gryffindor.
exactly, that really does seem like what Ron's reaction is I think he would wear that t-shirt. He would just be like, yeah, Gryffindors are gonna Gryffindor. Yeah, we're gonna lose points for stupid reasons. So, well, the rest of the school is, mightily unhappy with them. Ron's totally cool.
So they all get their detentions.
Yeah, and isn't this a thing? So, Hogwarts is clearly not your typical school, but you don't see that as strikingly until this moment, where detention means going into the Forbidden Forest, and the reason it's forbidden is because it is really dangerous. And it seems like totally okay to send, 3 or 4 misbehaving students into the Forbidden Forest, where it's incredibly dangerous, and if they get killed or maimed, oh well, that's the price of detention. So wow, suddenly the school does not seem just like kind of a quirky, eccentric school that you can imagine existing somewhere in the world. It seems like it's a really totally different place than any kind of school that most people have attended. So I gotta ask, did you ever get detention for anything, and was your life put in peril as a result of that? Is this typical?
I was actually a good student. Any infractions that I didn't really involve this level of issues. It's not like we didn't have a forbidden forest outside of our school, so to speak. The worst thing that we had to do is possibly have to go into like South Boston, try to get some components from a dealer down there. But even then, that was like basically a higher level 12th year thing. And to be fair, that wasn't even a punishment. That was a field trip. But yeah, I was a pretty good student. Usually when it comes down to magical schooling type things, anything that you do, Hagrid is right. It is to actually do something with the schooling. I spoke about this with some of my No-Maj friends about how we have some eccentric qualities in regards to our learning, like quills and parchment and things like that, and why don't we just use pens and notebook paper? And I just point out with them that my teachers told me, due to the fine motor skills that are required and how everything in magic has to be precise, you need to learn about being precise, which means working on smaller abilities that will help you with precision. A good example of this is the No-Maj film, The Karate Kid, where they have the Karate Kid doing things like painting fences and waxing cars to learn karate, where you might think that writing with a quill is a lot stupider than just using a pencil, when really what it is that most people don't have the manual dexterity needed for proper wand movements. So it builds up that type of thing. And as you get older, the more defined your skill set has to be. Hagrid is right when he goes to Malfoy in this regard and says you're going to do something that's needed or you're going to get out. Because Malfoy thought you were just going to write lines, when really it's like, oh no, you're going to do stuff that's going to help the school, or you can get out. And my school was like that. You're going to do stuff that's useful or get out.
Well, apparently this is useful. They're sending them into the Forbidden Forest to investigate who or what are killing the unicorns.
Yep, a injured unicorn, and Hagrid is right. Unicorns you don't usually find an injured unicorn.
Right. Apparently that's not only are they very rare, they're also pretty resilient, and not a lot of things. I'm not clear on whether it's particularly difficult to injure a unicorn, though I want to come back to that, but it seems like it's forbidden, so it would take place in the Forbidden Forest, but it's forbidden to hurt a unicorn. This is just not something that is done. So even though there are werewolves and things like that living in the Forbidden Forest, it's basically saying, well, a werewolf wouldn't do that. And I think it's a combination of it's forbidden, and also, I have a feeling it's kind of hard to hurt a unicorn. Am I wrong about that?
It is, because unicorns are, one, they're very swift. That's for one. And they usually don't allow people, especially men, to get close to them at all. They do go a little bit more about unicorns in depth in a later book, but he's right in that regard. Like they mention in this book that Harry mentions that they use unicorn horn and potions. That's, with unicorns, that's the equivalent of deer when they shed their antlers.
Oh, okay.
So it's like they shed their horn, so to speak. So they use unicorn horn. When it comes down to like things like unicorn hair, if you remember, they mention unicorn hair being a part of wand creation. If you have areas where there are unicorns, they do shed their hair and it gets tangled. Unicorn hair is strong and very resilient, and it can be used for a lot of things, not just with wand cores, but just general like binding of wounds and things of that nature. But basically anything that you get from a unicorn is usually like naturally giving, naturally shedded, or things of that nature.
It's good to know that unicorns are not usually poached, but that does make this fact that they're turning up injured and dead all the more unusual. Hagrid wants to find out what's doing this. Hagrid makes a really strange choice early on, and he sends Malfoy and Neville off with Fang. I knew that was going to be a problem as soon as he did it. Like, that is just, don't send Neville off with Malfoy. I mean, I get Hagrid wants to hang out with Hermione and Harry, but that's just poor judgment right there. That proves to be the case, of course. They're all poking around. We run into a centaur, which, boy, are these guys interesting. They're, very typical centaurs from legend, in that they're, part man, part horse, but they are also, really into stargazing. Like that's a big thing with them. And they don't answer questions directly. I have a feeling that, conversations with a centaur would be just endlessly frustrating in general. So, but there's a whole bunch of them living in the forest. So that's good, I guess, because it becomes important later in the chapter. Long story short, Malfoy can't resist the urge to sneak up and scare Neville, even though he himself was scared going into the forest. So, he got over that. And so Hagrid is forced to recombine and sends Harry and Malfoy off with Fang. And they do actually, they're following a trail of unicorn blood, and they do actually come across the body of a unicorn. And very disturbingly, they come across something that is drinking the blood of the unicorn. So we don't really know what this is at the time they encounter it, but we quickly suspect that this is actually, Voldemort, because Harry's scar starts to act up, and he has this intense pain in his head where his scar is, and one of the centaurs has to come in and intervene and get him out of there. But this raised a question for me, because Voldemort has been suspected dead, widely believed to be dead, except Hagrid had made a comment to the effect that he didn't think such a thing could be killed, really. But what we're pretty sure of is that he must be in a very weakened state. Because later we find out that if you drink unicorn blood, it makes you essentially immortal, but you have this very cursed life. It's a half-life. And so if Voldemort is in this very weakened state, what I would like to know is, was he able to really kill a unicorn?
That is a good question, and the Voldemort at the time was one of the darkest wizards of the time. And of course, it doesn't go into the details of what might have happened in regards to killing a unicorn. I have a theory. It's probably wrong because I don't go hunting unicorns, and to be quite honest, I barely made my OWL in the Care of Magical Creatures. However, what I'm thinking is it's like with other prey in the wild where they get nipped at and weakened until they're at a point where they just can't go anymore, and then they get attacked. Because if you remember, this unicorn has been spreading blood all over the place. So it might not be the fact that, oh, here's a unicorn, let's jump it. It's like, let's nick at it until it's slowed down enough to take it out, so to speak.
Okay, well, that could be. I was just very curious about how, Voldemort in this, can barely survive sort of state, doing the only thing he can to just stay alive, how he was able to, kill this animal that's apparently very hard to kill. But honestly, that makes sense. Kind of a, injure it and then follow it around until it drops.
Pretty much.
Yeah.
That's my theory.
That's really it's really gruesome. Yeah. So the centaur whisks Harry back to Hagrid. There's this whole weird, like really, really strange conversation with the centaurs about how, they're not going to let humans ride them. And I gotta say, what good is a centaur if they're not going to let humans ride them? So yeah. Anyway,
just a moment. I would just like to say that the views of Alice in Muggleland are not the views of the Mac USA offices, but this is the views of the No-Maj of the show. Any centaurs that have issues with this, please don't assault the Mac USA offices. Thank you.
Anyway, they have this conversation and they're talking about the prophecies, and honestly, the prophecies, or what's in the stars, according to the centaurs, does not seem like good news for Harry. Yeah, so that's not great. The centaurs seem like they want to observe and make note of what's being prophesied, but not really intervene. So they're again kind of an aloof and probably very difficult to speak to creature.
Well, Firenze is the one that actually basically hints to Harry that this is Voldemort and he's after the actual stone.
Right, but you would think that Harry would probably figure that out when his scar started hurting, or at least make a connection.
See, that's the thing. I don't think Harry would have made the connection without Firenze mentioning it.
Harry is maybe not the brightest boy, but he does know how he got the scar at this point in the story. He does know that Voldemort is a thing that may or may not actually be dead. And he does know that somebody is after the Sorcerer's Stone, so it would kind of make sense if Voldemort was looking for it. I think he had all the information he needed to put this together, but the Centaur made it clear for the first time in the Centaur's life, because they don't like to answer questions directly.
They go back to Gryffindor Tower, and Harry basically goes through and breaks down all the connections that he has made with this trip into the forest. And after they break everything down, with Ron constantly yelling, "Stop saying Voldemort," they go back to bed, and Harry finds his invisibility cloak with a note that says, "Just in case." Not creepy at all.
Yeah, that's not creepy.
So, I just have a few questions that to bring up with you in regards to this chapter, and in regards to the things that were mentioned in this chapter. We have unicorns, we have centaurs. In regards to your own aspects of No-Maj fairy tales, what could you bring into the light of things such as this for the No-Maj perspective in the books?
Well, as I mentioned, the centaurs go way back. Unicorns go back probably even further. There's actually mention of unicorns in the Bible. So these are definitely archetypal characters that are appearing in this world, along with werewolves and vampires, and there's quite a lot of sources that she's drawn on. Probably way too many for me to mention, but it's interesting to see these characters and creatures from all of these different genres of literature brought together and kind of remixed into this one universe.
All right. So, who is currently your favorite character in the book?
Kind of tough. I don't know. I think I'm gonna vote Ron. Ron with his Gryffindor don't care. Whatever. he's Gryffindor. I mean, the whole don't say his name thing is kind of annoying because seriously, with everything else going on in the world, like that's the least of his problems. But I do like his attitude about the points being lost.
Like we were saying, Gryffindor is going to Gryffindor.
Yep.
All right, that's all we have for this chapter. So next we meet, we will be going over chapter 16, Through the Trap Door. Now, I know that we've been on a little bit of hiatus in regards to the recent episodes. I've been busy with my work with the Mac USA, and Alice has her travel. But that doesn't mean that we don't want to hear from you. So make sure you go visit us on Facebook. We are at /Alice in Muggleland. We're also on Twitter at @AinMuggleland. And you can always email us at AliceandMugglelandpodcast@gmail.com. We'll be able to go through and respond, and we just want to be able to get more of a sense of how everything's going. Also, make sure to like and subscribe and review with us on iTunes and wherever you get your podcasts, which does include Spotify. So we'll be able to go through and get more involved with our community and everything like that. Is there anything else that you'd like to add, Alice?
No, that sounds good. Find us on Facebook.
Talk with us. We like to talk. All right. So that being said, tune in next time, folks. Knox.
Don't know if you'll be able to hear this or not, but this is the key sound for our podcast. Could you hear that?
Just that boom.
Yep. It's the sound of me taking a cork out of a bottle of bourbon.
As long as it's not.
I love that piece of music, though.